In the Huddle was created to give student athletes, parents and coaches an inside look at the journey through US college sport and all that comes with it. The demands, the experiences, the excitement and the opportunities available to our student athletes from around the world. Study and Play USA facilitates a comprehensive, customised approach for student athletes and families for their whole journey, from their high school preparation years right through to US college graduation.
Today's guest is a leading physiotherapist with a Masters in Strength and Conditioning Exercise Science. He's worked with Olympians on site at the London Olympics, professional athletes across a range of sports, and professional on-stage performers on London's West End. Between himself and his staff at Performance Physio, they've worked with the Queensland Firebirds netball team, Wallabies rugby squad, Cirque du Soleil artists and more. Recently we've seen our own Ash Barty reach the pinnacle of her sport, and Sean, our guest today, has played an important role in her journey. And I'm looking forward to talking more about Ash shortly. But I'm also pumped for today's guest to share some insights into his work and, importantly, how he and his team of physios and physiologists can help best prepare student athletes for their college journeys. So let's welcome Sean Fyfe to today's episode of In the Huddle.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you, Sean. Mate, I'm going to start right off the top. I'm going to rewind a few years. I'm just curious to see how do you get into something like physio, mate? How did that all come about?
So, really, it probably came from just being involved with sport when I was young, and then playing tennis, growing up, playing all the tournaments, and then you have a few injuries, so you go to the physio and you think, oh, that's pretty cool, kind of involved with sport. And then, through going through school, I was always reasonably good at science, and then kept my interest going in sport. So, yeah, and then I finished uni, was always, wanted to pursue my tennis as well. So then I got involved, I went into physio, and then also studied kind of strength and conditioning and did my coaching levels at uni as well. And so that's kind of where it stemmed from, really. And then you're just being interested in, as I kind of got into physio and started being more and more interested in sports science, sports medicine, and and just have always loved sports. So I've just kind of been lucky enough to be able to kind of combine the two kind of passions, I suppose.
Yeah, awesome. And look, obviously in that big wrap I've given you in the intro there with all those things we listed off, but there's some pretty cool experiences in there that's where physio's taking you, right? So tell us a little bit, mate, about the London side of things, but from Olympics, and then we've obviously mentioned working with on-stage performers as well. Like, I'm curious to sort of see how those things differed. Do athletes have a different attitude to physio or preparation for their competition than, say, performers on stage? But yeah, talk a bit about the London experience.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to go to the London Olympics, and that's when I was doing a lot of work with Bernard Tomic back in the day when he was, probably at that kind of, probably the height of his career, really, around that time, before kind of things probably got derailed for Bernard for multiple reasons. But so yeah, that was great. So it was a pretty cool experience because it was played at Wimbledon, and then probably never really thought that I'd kind of have the opportunity to go to an Olympics. So there was, certainly bit of a career highlight for me. And then worked just with Bernard through the Olympics, and then but previous to that, the work in West End was when I'd had a back injury myself at the end of my uni days, which kind of kept me out of tennis. So I had surgery in my last year of uni, and then I kind of took a break from tennis, and then I went overseas just traveling and working, and ended up I was kind of quite random. For a few years I'd written for this quite a kind of well-known sports injury publication, and through someone that had read my work in that, they reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in working in a sports medicine clinic that had all the contracts in the West End. And so then I ended up, doing all the physio work for all the kind of West End performers, and like Billy Elliott, Lion King, and Rat Pack, Stomp. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, they're very similar in terms of question about the differences. I mean, they're pretty similar in terms of there's especially the performers like in Lion King that were doing so much physical work, and they do so many shows. So maybe sometimes just doing one show is not as physically intense as an athlete performing. An athlete competing. But they do so many shows. Every day they're doing a 3 hour show, and then matinees, and then they've got to do rehearsals, and so it's pretty physically demanding for those shows that are really physically kind of active. And I suppose mentally, they're also just them getting up, have to get themselves up to do a show. So mentally, you can see it takes its toll as well. But, and so similar to athletes that have to compete at regular basis, sometimes the tank can be a bit empty. And yeah, but I wouldn't say there's a huge difference in terms of them trying to look after their body, because their career depends on it. So, they, especially those high-end performers, and we do a fair bit of work with all the top ballet dancers as well. And in particular, the real high-end dancers and ballet dancers, I mean, they are just completely in tune with their body, and their whole career relies on it. So they're spending a lot of the time actually just trying to make sure that they can actually, look after their body and remain injury-free.
Yeah, that's awesome. Interesting take, pretty cool experience, and I imagine you learn from those performers, and you can bring that into working with athletes. And I said, my take on ballet performers and on stage, to me, just outside looking in, would be that they probably do look after their body more than the average athlete, from my experience with athletes, and again, probably self-reflecting here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the on the type of sport, because you find there's so much variation in terms of the sport you're working with, in terms of then and also the individual athletes, but in terms of how much emphasis and how much effort they go into putting in to looking after their body. And I think it's the same. If you have someone who's had some injuries in the past and they're still really dedicated to do what they do, they become so diligent in their kind of injury management or their physical management.
Yeah,
so,
it's just part of what they do. Hey, like and James Duckworth is a good example, right? And then you've got on the other side of the stick, you've probably got your Ash Barty, and you've worked with both of them. But for the listeners, obviously James Duckworth is a fairly prominent Australian tennis player, we'd have to say now. He's one of our highest ranked players at the moment.
Number 2 now,
in the top 50 in the world last year, 2021. So, and I know he's had such a unbelievable journey of injury and recovery, and it's obviously working, now. So at probably the latter part of his career, he'll be closer to the end of his career than the start. So that's an interesting point, because obviously we mentioned Ash Barty, who, as far as I'm aware, Sean, she hasn't had too many injuries along the way. She's been
relatively injury-free. I mean, I'm not closely connected to work with Ash now, but I've just worked with her as a junior. But just kind of follow her career, which is what a lot of Australians do now. But it's so cool to watch her go through her career. But she hasn't had a lot of injuries. She's got a really great strength and conditioning coach now, Mark Taylor. So yeah, I think she's as you can see, she's worked a lot on her strength. I mean, I think it's always I don't think Ash was a natural athlete in terms of her physical capacities, in terms of her being super fast to sprint or accelerate or jump or anything. And so this is probably an interesting one to talk about, is that you kind of get these athletes, someone like Ash, or even Duck's the same. Ducks would be the first one to say it as well. They're not super explosive and super fast athletes naturally. And I think sometimes they're the types of people that actually benefit most from a great strength and conditioning program. Because if you've got someone who already is so zippy and explosive and can quickly recruit those high threshold motor units and be really explosive, and they're already doing that really, really well, sometimes it's hard. I mean, you're always going to get improvements out of them, but you can't get the same level improvements. Where if someone who's maybe not doing that as well in their early days, and they do a really good strength and conditioning program, and they actually start to get their max strength up safely, and then they can actually do the stuff that helps them, deliver power really fast and increase that, rate of force development, then I think they're the ones that can really benefit from a great strength and conditioning program. So I'd say someone like Ash has she's done a lot of strength conditioning work over the years, and I think she's a perfect example of someone who, if you put in the work, you can actually really improve your athleticism, even if it's not something that's your most natural component. Like, you wouldn't say Ash's her most natural thing is, is her athleticism, but she's so super coordinated, tactically so aware. There's so many other attributes to what makes her great, but she's had to really, benefit from really good sports science input to get the most out of herself physically. So I think that's probably a good one it's a really important message, I think, for people to understand, coaches and parents, is that if you've got a kid who's like maybe, pretty coordinated, pretty talented in a sport, and maybe they're not supernatural physically, all right, but if you can try and do a really good strength conditioning program through those developmental years and beyond, you can actually try and really improve that part, and then you combine someone like Ash, right? So if you put her in a straight line, she may not be the fastest, but you combine that kind of her being maximized in terms of her physical output because if she's had good strength conditioning programs over the years, with the fact that she's got such great perceptual skills, so she's anticipating so well, she actually looks now like she moves unbelievably well on the court, and is tends to look like maybe one of the best movers out there because, she has got that strength now she's developed, and she's anticipating so well. So, yeah, I'd say to any parent is that just because they're not if you've got a kid who is, got some talent in the sport in terms of the perceptual, anticipation, coordination, skill components, then trying to actually, start early in their strength and conditioning. Not mean you're lifting heavy weights, super heavy weights early or anything, but that's a really important point to remember. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks. It's a really good point, because if I reflect back to the way I viewed physio back when I was a kid coming through as well as an athlete, is you go to a physio if something's broken or needs fixing, or you've got an injury or tightness, soreness, whatever, right? Something's hindering your performance. But now it's changed so much. I mean, you go to a physio like yourself where, okay, right, let's see where your deficiencies are and let's load that up and let's work on the right areas to build up strength and conditioning, as you said, and get you on a good program there to prevent the injury in the first place, and then of course treating any issues that come up. So, I mean, is that the way you've seen your industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. So the way, I mean, we work kind of as a business now, and the way I've kind of worked increasingly over the time is that I suppose just combined physio and strength and conditioning a lot, because they're just so linked, right? So if you've got someone who you want to get single leg power out, but they can't single leg squat, and if they can't single leg squat, they're more inclined to get maybe patellofemoral joint pain or patellar tendinosis, and therefore they can't work on their single leg power. So they're so linked. And I think I suppose from a screening point of view, and we use musculoskeletal screenings as our kind of first touch point quite often with young athletes. So, but we probably do things quite differently to maybe the ways others do screenings, and probably just change it over time. If you're happy, I'll go into that a little bit now if you want. I think when screenings were first done a lot for me, when I first did my screenings when I first graduated, it was involved with like doing a really in-depth assessment and then doing a really in-depth report. And then the young athlete or the young client would get this really cool in-depth report that you had a goniometer measuring, to measure ankle range, or, to measure shoulder internal rotation, whatever it was. And there's all this kind of cool information, but then it kind of like stopped. And it was like, okay, what do you do with that? So in time, I've just gone like, we need to actually focus on things that are actually going to make a difference. There's no point in having this 5 pages of stuff about you if it doesn't actually make any tangible impact to the way you're actually functioning or performing.
Yep.
So I probably focus on less on being so, we do focus less on being so kind of detailed in terms of the nitty little bits of, range of movement is being so specific with it, for example. But we focus on, of course, like past injury history is a really important one to focus in on, because that's going to be your biggest predictor of, future injury. But what we do now is actually have a look in the screenings about just what their physical fundamentals are like. So can they do a lunge? Can they squat? Can they hip hinge with a neutral spine? Have what external rotation strength if it's for a throwing athlete? So the real kind of things that are actually going to make a difference. And then part of this first stage of the screening, of course, if someone's got really tight hip flexors, and we're going to have a look at that, and we're going to address that in it as well, the glaring things. But what we'll try and work into the first parts of the screening, say if it's a 12-year-old, is we try and upskill them on all these physical fundamentals that are going to that start to build the foundation so that they can do a proper strength and conditioning program later. So, for example, if they've got to learn how to hip hinge properly and they've got no idea where their neutral spine is, well, they're not going to be able to do a Romanian deadlift or a deadlift to produce, power through their hamstrings and glutes, which is going to help jump performance or sprint performance, right? So start them as a 12-year-old actually doing techniques that actually help them actually be able to understand, okay, this is what hinging at the hip looks like. This is how I keep a neutral spine. So we try and, in our screenings, be a little bit, and then we don't try and do this big fancy report. We go, hey, these are the things that are going to make a difference for you long term. And so, can they do all those physical fundamentals, hold a neutral spine in a plank, or do a shoulder blade push-up so they've got some serratus anterior function? Or so we do those things, and then that's kind of our first kind of point. And then we put all that on an app, so they have actually, something they can follow with pictures and videos, and then we update that as we go along, review them in 6 to 8 weeks, and then kind of use that as a first point. And then that leads into them being able to then go into a strength and conditioning program. I think so. We try to separate. We call that an injury management program or body management program that we develop off the back of the musculoskeletal screening, but it has a lot of the technical kind of fundamentals that young kids have got to work on. Now that'll probably be a little bit different for a 16-year-old who has already got maybe some of those physical fundamentals, but for the young kids that, in that early journey, it's their first kind of maybe, the first time they see a physio or the first time they have introduction to any kind of strength and conditioning or physical development. That's the way we try and go about it. And I think it works really well. Another thing that's really important there is that we might say, look, let's it's your first time you're actually doing something for your body apart from, that's specifically for your body. So let's not try and overload you, because we've got to keep the sport fun and everything. So let's start with you trying to do this, once or twice a week. And we usually have a stability strength part of the program and then a flexibility part of the program. And they might do it, half an hour, 4 times a week, two of each of the programs. And then that's a starting point. If they can do that and they're into it, then we'll progress things along a little bit and maybe start to get them in the gym. But if they're struggling to do that, we'll say, hey, just keep focusing on that. And then once you become more mentally kind of mature and you can actually start to dedicate yourself a little bit more to add more stuff in. You don't want to try to throw too much at a 12-year-old and all of a sudden the sport's becoming a little bit kind of arduous and, mum and dad are not happy with them because they're not doing their 6 hours physical work. And, it takes the fun out of the sport, because the most important thing at that age is keeping the fun, right?
Yeah, and actually playing the sport. Yeah.
And just playing, yeah. So it's just, it's basically, we just focus on the things, the physical fundamentals, and then what are the important things that they can do that are the biggest red flags for injury, so that they can keep playing and play a certain volume that they need. With any sport, you need a certain volume that gives you the certain number of skill exposures, so you get perceptual and coordination develop in your sport. So can they handle a certain amount of volume because they're physically capable enough to withstand that volume, so they get enough skill learning experiences, basically.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So you mentioned how it might be, would be different for a 12-year-old as opposed to probably a 14, 16-year-old. That initial screening, right?
And the 16-year-old, you probably, they've probably had some more injuries. They're probably, if it's someone who's a reasonably elite athlete, they're probably going to be doing some strength and conditioning work, and they've probably got some of those physical fundamentals down pat. So you might be specifically going, right, they've got their strength and conditioning program they're doing. So now we're going to have this body management program, which really, really narrows down in on these specific areas that they need to focus on. Might be hip extension. It might be serratus anterior function. It might be lower abdominal function, thoracic extension mobility, and these real key areas that one might be just important for their sport, for all athletes in that sport, but also may relate to their past injury history, or just when we've done a bit of the musculoskeletal screening, they're just they pick up at, hey, that's an issue. You're 15, you're hitting your peak height, velocity and growth, and then you've got tight hip flexors, and there's some risk red flags there for a stress fracture or something. So we're going to go, these are the important things for you to actually really focus on as specifics in your body management, and then you've got your strength and conditioning program over there.
That's awesome. So, obviously at Study and Play USA, we work with, there's 25 sponsored sports in America, and we work with virtually all of them. So we've got kids that are spending a lot of time in the classroom, and then when they're not in the classroom, they're sitting in a boat as rowers, which is a really different functional movement to, say, a swimmer. And obviously we've got track and field, might have a javelin thrower, we might have a sprinter. With those types of screens that you do, initial screens, is there sort of a fundamental set of exercise that you've just described that can be applied pretty much across all sports, or do you specifically, depends on the individual and their sport?
So if you're talking about young athletes, there's physical fundamentals that you want them to be able to do, right? Some of the key things are, it doesn't matter what sport, because really a 12-year-old, okay, they might be, you still want them to be able to do a lunge when they're a swimmer, a single leg squat. You need them to be able to squat. You need them to be able to hip in. So you need them to be able to hold a side plank, hold a plank, brace their spine, perform some anti-rotation, stabilization work. So at that age, you want them to focus on building a general, well-rounded kind of body. And then as they get older, it'll become more and more specific. So as they get older, they're probably starting to narrow down into a sport. They're 16, they're probably starting to focus in on maybe one sport in particular. It depends, like it depends if it's an early or late specialization sport, like gymnastics, such an early specialization sport compared to say, triathlon or something like that, right? So the how early or late specialization would be taken into consideration. But then there's specific thing, and then you've got those general physical fundamentals. Then you've got the specifics of the sport, right? So rowers, for example, hip range becomes really, really important. Upper back strength becomes, really, really important. Dorsiflexion of the ankle, really important. So, yeah.
Oh, that's good, mate. Yeah, that's really, really, really interesting because it's, as I said, it's obviously I've known your work and seen your work, and you've done some screens with some of our athletes in the past and currently. So I'm sort of always constantly learning here because, as I said before, I've come from an era where stretching and looking after yourself was really only starting to come into vogue.
I'm the same. We both played junior tennis tournaments growing up, and no introduction to kind of any of this. I remember a coach just used to help me out quite a bit when I was like 12, and he introduced me to skipping at home. So I used to skip at home every night because he said that was one condition of me, And then I went to the physio first time. I got a TheraBand, and I did a couple of TheraBand exercises. But that was about it. We didn't, and I suppose that's a little bit for where my passion comes from for it, is that, I had back surgery at 21, which kind of, I would have loved to be able to pursue my playing after uni a lot more. And so, we just didn't have any input to this stuff. And, and I know for me, I look at it as a case of like, if I had some input of how to actually develop some of these physical fundamentals, and someone taught me how to strengthen myself a little bit at a younger age. I had my first back episode when I was about 13, had some other back episodes. I know I had a decent back episode when I was about 18, 19. And then by 21, I had a disc prolapse on a nerve. And, but no one ever said, hey, stop, you got to go and get strong at these types of things. Which I look back now knowing what I know, and I see the progression of my back problems from the age of probably 13. Every couple of years I was getting some back issues. I'd settle down, I'd keep playing, but then I look back thinking, well, that's actually what was happening. It was probably starting back in that young age, but no one actually ever just said, hey, stop, you got to get strong in these areas, right?
Yeah, there was no Sean Fyfe screening you back then.
Well, maybe there was back then, but no, I didn't have access to it, at least anyway, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. It would have been amazing, right? But I don't think a lot. I mean, there was a bit of luck back then. I mean, I know heaps of like great players I grew up playing with that their playing was curtailed because they got an injury, and were great players, and were on the better players than me, and they were on a trajectory to maybe break through, and they were really slowed down. So there's heaps of them, and it's not just me. There's lots of people that were in the same boat, right? But I think they absolutely. It's this is a great example now, right? Like with you see the longevity of athletes now. It's a great thing to talk about. Kelly Slater just won, Pipeline at 50, and then you've got Nadal winning what was Nadal, 36, 37?
Yeah, ridiculously old.
These older athletes who are doing amazing things, I think it all comes down, like big part of it comes down to just the way better sports science knowledge, way better sports medicine techniques, that are available now. And there's so much more of a, ability to deal with like things like chronic tendon injuries so I think this is why we're seeing athletes go for such longer periods of time. You mentioned Dux before, you're saying about, he's probably at towards the back end of his career. And I probably disagree in that, he's just turned 30. You'd hope to think he's halfway through. In terms of his big window, his big window for where he's going to do stuff. I'd say he's just maybe at the start of where he's going to do some. Unfortunately, he's had this hip operation recently, but I think he's players can play to their 37, 38. So hopefully he's got that another 7 or 8 years, maybe. I mean,
who's to say? Nadal's shown that you can, and Dux, if you're listening, my apologies, sell you short there of your career, but it'd be great. I hope you're right.
He's filthy, actually.
Yeah.
No, but you're right. Like I think, that's the. I mean, and even on to that, right? That's why college, I reckon, is. College now is such a, or kids getting university degrees. Considering that we can now see people going through a longer journey of their in terms of their sport, right? So instead of thinking, I'm going to be done by the time I'm 30, I can be done by the time I'm 37, right? So if I do a 4-year degree at the start of my career, it kind of makes more sense now than it ever did in my mind, because you get this, you've got so much more time at the end of your career if you look after yourself. And it's probably, I know there's some good players like Alcaraz in the tennis, for example, breaking through, and in other sports, good young athletes coming through. But if you're not one of those superstars breaking through, it makes more sense because you get to develop yourself as a person by going to uni and doing all those other things. And then you're 21 when you finish, and you still got 16, 17 years you can have a professional career, rather than before, thinking you'd be washed up by your 30. So I think sports medicine and sports science, in terms of increasing longevity of athletes, means that college probably can start to make even more sense for people.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because the culturally, Americans, when you go there as a student athlete, they do have this. It's an unwritten, certainly not unspoken, but it's basically an agreed upon culture of see out your 4 years. Just you've got time. You've got time. Let's just get this done. Let's develop physically. Let's develop emotionally. Let's develop maturity, so that then you can go out and compete whatever sport it is, and you're still 21 at the end. And look, let's not think this way, but if you do encounter problems and injuries, and maybe you're just not good enough and it doesn't work out, you've got this degree behind you. But what's interesting with that for America, that's been since college has existed. That's been the attitude in general in America. And if you look at, you read about athletes that have gone on, baseballers, American footballers, softballers, tennis players, swimmers, that had the opportunity to leave college after 1 year because they're just superstars. And they've resisted that temptation because they know that their body needs 3 more years of education, educating how to actually look after my body, 3 years of maturity, 3 years of actually filling out, becoming stronger and ready for the rigors of, that professional sport. So I think that's really interesting, mate. And if we just,
I'd make one other comment there. So, and I like having worked, been involved with sport young, now worked across sport in multiple capacities, coaching, S&C, physio, and worked across all different sports. And then probably being an avid reader and follower of sport, I think one thing that's probably not spoken about enough in terms of the mental health side of it. So you see all these athletes who finish their career and have quite significant mental health problems, some more sports than others, but it's a fairly decent issue. And a lot of the clubs now, I was talking to somebody the other day who's quite involved with rugby, and one of the rugby franchises mandate that they've got to be doing university education at the same time, or have completed some in their academy programs and stuff like that, right? So, and this, I'd even draw my own personal experiences here. I think you're an athlete for a certain period of time, and then you've got to be a functioning human being, and hopefully a happy functioning human being for a long period of time. So those those years after you finish school, I think are hugely formative. And so you start to get these experiences outside of, you have these experiences outside of your sport. You're actually, you're a person outside of your sport. You're like, you know, tennis playing or golf is part of kind of what you do. And you know that you've also got a marketing degree or some other degree or university degree. And so I think knowing that you've got something to fall back on, but also having these other experiences that develop you as a person, as a human, and you know, I think is really invaluable. You know, you could even argue that someone like Ash Barty went out when she had her break, is that was almost like her time to just take away and actually not be a professional athlete and develop all these other kind of, you know, aspects to herself as a person. And she obviously speaks so wonderfully now, and it sounds like she's done amazing work with Ben Crow. And so I think, yeah, I mean, it's just, it just kind of, I think it's really important, you know, for parents, I think, because they're steering the ship in a lot of ways, for them to consider, okay, I need to give my kid the experiences that's going to help them be a happy person when they're 50 years old. And
Yes.
so, and I think having those experiences outside of their sport, even get developing a whole bunch of friends. Like some of my best friends are uni, right? So, you know, sometimes you can miss out of that network of friends that you'll have for life as well. So, yeah, I think it's a, you know, it's a really important thing to consider in terms of the long-term mental health implications beyond just the sport for them as an individual person, as to why, you know, yeah, you know, you've got the physical side of it in terms of the sport and having longevity, but then you've got, you know, in terms of being more robust physically, and it's going to help you in your sport and everything. But then on the flip side, well, I think it's going to allow you to have, you know, a greater chance for potentially, you know, better well-being when you're older and maybe through your career.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and the other thing that I always think about, you know, going to college or university is that it kind of allows you in some ways, unless you're a superstar like a Nadal or Alcaraz or Zverev, where you can just break through straight away, right?
Yep.
But if you're not like that, and you're going to end up getting kind of caught, or you know, and if that's golf or whatever sport you may want to talk about, where you're going to go to the top echelon straight away, right? But if you get education, it allows you to kind of hang into your sport a little bit longer, because you know you've got something to background. Because so many athletes I've worked with, they're going to get to this 22 point, and they're starting to hit the panic button a little bit about, what am I going to do? You know, like, okay, maybe I'm not good enough, but what am I going to do with my life? And they're starting to hit the panic button a little bit about their kind of long-term life prospects. Whereas if they've got some education background, I think it just allows them to settle in and go, hey, I've got stuff to fall back on. I can continue to pursue my dream here a little, because I know I've got other things to fall back on. And I think that the mental freedom of that, I think, is kind of really kind of important, you know. You know, yeah.
Totally.
Someone like Matt Ebden, you know, in tennis, I know I'm bringing back tennis, but it's what I know best. He's got I think a commerce degree. You know, Ducks started a commerce degree in his first years of going on tour. So yeah, I think they're important things to remember. And I think some of this is coming out of my field of physiotherapy, but it's just being involved with so many athletes over time.
Yeah, no, it's a great observation, and it's something I'm pretty passionate about, actually, especially with the college pathway, because that's what I've lived, and that's what we live and breathe every day. It's unfortunately, with the modern humans, me being one of them, and we're all part of this new age of getting information quickly, wanting things done. We're time poor. We're in a bit of a rush all the time. Everyone's busy, and you know, so when it comes to making decisions about life and do I go to university or not, or do I try and pursue my sport now straight out of high school, or even leave school early in some cases, and be a professional athlete now, because we want results now. You know, we're pretty impatient as a society. I think that's the counter to what you're saying, and that's the struggle I think that some people have. But what I'm pleased with when we meet with families more and more, you know, when we have a sit down meeting with any family, we're noticing that the kids themselves, and some of them as young as 12, 13, 14, and we're just having a bit of an initial chat with, you know, what are your plans? What are your goals? What do you think you might be interested in the college pathway? Well, it's somewhere where I can buy myself time to decide what I really want to do. whilst I'm doing that, I'm playing the sport I love, hopefully getting better at it, getting a degree that's reputable, and by the end of the 4 years, the idea is I'm pretty clear on what I want to do, and that's to pursue that sport on its own, or it's to use what I've done here to get another job or whatever. But so it's really encouraging. It's really encouraging, and then but you can sense with some families we chat with is that they are caught in that rush zone a little bit, which I was, and I'm the same as those people you were talking about earlier. You get to 21, 22, what am I doing? Well, that was me, and that was so thankful that college just came at the right time for me, and kind of helped me find my identity outside of tennis. So that's a really interesting one. It's a really good point, and
I think it's massive having that. Yeah,
it's a good point, mate. Yeah, so look, I think mindful of your time, you've probably got to go and get back on the table with the clients. So, mate, one of the things I just want to just touch on to finish off is just in terms of how can someone like yourself and your staff help, and how important is it, I suppose, for a student athlete? Let's say they've gone through the process with us, they've finalised their scholarship offers, and they've signed right with a university in America. What can they do, A, to best prepare for the rigors of college physically, right? What sort of things should they be doing? B, what can they be doing when they're at college to maintain a good level of fitness, aside from what they're offering over there and that sort of thing? Is there things they should be doing on their own? And then 3, what can they do in their breaks? So most of our kids will come home and return to their families at some point throughout the year, whether it's for 3 months across the American summer or home for Christmas for a month or so. In those 3 instances, what sort of things can they do to look after their body?
You got three-part question for me, Chris.
Yeah.
This might remind me of the parts. So the first thing is what they can do. They've signed to a college, right?
Yeah, during, and after.
So I would say one of the most important things in my experience of dealing with athletes preparing them for going off to college, having a look at how their college experience turns out, and then seeing them when they come home quite often as well. I would say really trying to ensure that you're very physically robust before you go, because you get this situation sometimes where you get there, the coach is trying to make a bit of an impact, trying to get everyone going, fire them up, train them hard. And if you don't have that physical robustness before you go, and you can't tolerate that intensity or load, it can maybe not work out as well as what it could have. So I would say making sure you've got that, making sure that you have a really good strength conditioning program before you go. Have a screening, know your own body well, and have a plan of how you manage your own body. Say you've had instability of your glenohumeral joint, your shoulder, and a little cuff tear. And so, okay, now I need to do this most of my program. I need to keep this level of strength. I need to do this 2 to 3 times a week, depending on my level of competition. And I've got that program. I do that. So even if you go there and you don't get the level of sports medicine support you might need, you've got that on your program. You're well educated on it, and you've got to do that to manage it. So I would say having yourself in good physical condition in terms of having good plans for every single athlete's kind of carrying a niggle in their body or carrying parts of their body they need to look after most all the time, right? You watch the Australian Open recently or other events, and they go, everyone that wins a Grand Slam is carrying an injury, right? For example, or at least a niggle. So I would say being physically robust. So that involves having done a good strength and conditioning program, being very technically competent in the gym, and having good strength in all the areas you need for your sport. I would say having a really good body management plan that's specifically related to you. If you're someone who's got an anterior tilting pelvis and a big lordosis in your back, and you get really tight hip flexors, you need to have, all right, I do these hip flexor extension drills, these lower ab and these glute activation drills, and that's what I do to manage my back so it continues to function in a way that's going to not be painful. So I think that would be one of the most important things that you can do is be screened, educated, have a good strength and conditioning program, have a clear body management plan before you go over. And sometimes be really technically competent in the gym, because they like to get into their gym when you get over there as well. So I would also say that when you get over there, there can be, it depends on the college, right? But there can be quite group training type stuff, right? And maybe sometimes you don't get the individualization you need. And that would link back to needing to have a body management plan before you go over of how you manage your specifics. Now, also, when you get across there, it can be a little bit varied in terms of the sports medicine attention you get. Some kids come back and go, yeah, the physios are great, awesome. Others go, oh, the football team gets all the attention, so it can vary. I think if you're just educated in terms of your own individual body and you know how to trigger point this, release this, strengthen this, once again, having that plan, I think that's, you're going to have good people to work with over there, but it can be a little bit varied. So just knowing yourself well and having learned about yourself before you go is really important. And then, just having the discipline when you're over there to do the extra bits that you need to do for your body. So, if you're the really dedicated kids, if you've done a group gym session, you stay back half an hour and do the stuff you need to do to strengthen certain areas of your body, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I'd say to touch on as well in terms of your physical robustness before you go, and this could depend on the sport a little bit, but is that my experience is when kids go to college, they get into the aerobic conditioning stuff pretty hard, pretty quickly. So I'd suggest that you need to be two things: have a good aerobic capacity before you go, so that you can tolerate that well. And if you've got good aerobic capacity, that's going to help you not get injured because you're not going to get as fatigued. You're going to be controlling movement better with less fatigued muscles, etc. But then having done some pretty solid training before you go and having your loads up to a level that is pretty good, and you can tolerate those loads, because when you get there, you can have your loads pretty high pretty quickly. And I think the third part of your question is, the other thing that we do, one guy in particular, really great soccer player, spent time at Man City when he was young, is at a college there now.
Robbie.
Robbie, So he'd had some problems, he had some bad injuries when he was in England, and he dislocated his kneecap and had surgery. And he's a really academic kid there, so he pursued his academics pretty hard as well at the same time. And so I've kind of known him for ages and kind of worked alongside him for ages. So we've had a good relationship, and I know his body pretty well. So there's been multiple times where he's, I've done telehealth with him over there. So having that point, just to get a little bit more input back into what he's doing. Like he had some bad osteitis pubis, and we just showed him a bit of other stuff that he maybe wasn't quite doing over there, and it's worked out well for him. We use an exercise management software called Track Active, which is, we set up like programs on the app so they get all pictures and videos, sets, reps, and we can update it from here, and it goes updates on their phones and stuff. So I'm doing that through telehealth, with, having that contact. And I've probably done that with, probably 7 or 8 different athletes over the last few years that, college athletes that just need a little bit more input. I've known them before they go overseas, so they can kind of reach out to me when they're over there. And then when they come home, is the third part of your question, I think, is I think what can happen is you come home and you just have a rest, and you probably drop the ball a little bit too much. So I think what you probably should do is just treat it like an off season. Is that when you come home, it might be 3 months you come home for, right? And so you come home, you might have 2 or 3 weeks off, which is what you need. Your body needs to recover. And that might depend on how much time you've had off before you come, if you're doing exams before you got home or whatever. So, 2 to 3 weeks, that's a pretty typical amount of time. Or if you've had a really arduous season, it might be 3 or 4 weeks off. But that's still trying to stay physically active. And then go into what you just think is a pre-season. In pre-season, you start to slowly return your loads. You get back, re-engage with your physical fundamentals in the gym, do base general strength, and then build up some good strength, max strength values and stuff, and then start to become a little bit more specific in your training before you go. So I just treat your college when you come home, not to say that you still have a good time and have your break and catch up with all your friends, but you can do both, right? So, I think the ones that are the athletes that are serious about continuing to improve through their college years so that they're in a good place to pursue their sport after they finish, I would be saying that in your off season, if you do come home, treat it as an off season, downtime, and then just go through those different phases of your off season until you're doing, more specific stuff, reintroducing your load so you're ready to go when you get back over there. So Same thing. It's like going over there for your first time. You go across there, you've had your summer holidays, and you go across, and you need to be like, have your physical robustness there again, because you're going to have new kids coming into college, competing for your spots. The coach is going to be pushing you. So don't go across there without having prepared yourself again. Because, the kids that go across there, they don't get injured early. They make a good impact on the coach. They're physically fit when they get there. They can engage in training. They can compete hard in their sessions for their spots, and they're the ones that you can, talk to. What was your last year like? What was your last nine months like? They're the ones that actually get the best experiences and kind of hit the ground running every year. But you don't want to be like, improve and then come back off season, dip down. Maybe you got to pick back up again. You wasted 3 months to get your levels back, and so that would be. I think I've answered your question there, Chris, in the 3 parts.
Yeah, you did all 3 beautifully, mate. You did very, very well. No, it's actually great info because it sort of supports what we say as well. And one of the things that I just wanted to say to student athletes listening, just on top of what Sean said, is that in this process, in trying to get to college, a lot of your focus through high school is trying to perform in your sport and academically, obviously. And the goal is to get a scholarship. That's first step, right? But then once that's received and that's finalised, we do see the effect, right? We go, okay, I've got my scholarship. All right, it's cruise time. And I think that's the time to actually amp it up. And that's when you do need to, okay, now I want to hit the ground running when I get there. So just taking that advice that Sean just gave, okay, once you got your scholarship, you should be doing something every day to help your body. Or more than one thing, but there's something you can be doing every day, and by then you should be knowing your routines. If you don't know your own body, you don't have a body management plan. I think listening to today, if you've got this far into the podcast and listened, hopefully you've been probably educated and inspired maybe to do something about that, because I think. Once you get to America, the coaches don't owe you anything. Okay, you in a sense you owe them and their team. They've given you opportunity. You've got to do your very best. So you've got to present as a fit and healthy athlete who's ready to go. Not least of all to be able to compete against opponents and your opposition, other universities, but even within your team to be able to make that lineup or whatever your team is. So. Some really, really good stuff there, Sean.
I'll give you one more point, Chris, on that note. Like if you've got this kind of journey, like we're thinking, you spoke about, I've reached my goal of getting my scholarship, and then I've reached, I would say the one bit of advice I could pass on, and I'll use James Duckworth as an example, having known him for so long, and he's probably someone that some people would say, like he's continued to improve despite his injuries, right? And the thing that stands out about Ducks is that, and that I think a lot of people could learn from, particularly these young athletes, he's really got this mindset of mastery, which is that he's always just looking at any moment, what can I do to get better? And he's almost like he's in his own bubble, but he's just worried about what I can do to get better all the time. And he's just like, okay, what's my schedule going to be? Every little part of my game, what am I working on here? What in my game, in physically, he's always reassessing himself and then going, right, I need to do this. He'll come home from overseas and right, I've got to get faster out of the forehand. I've got to clean my forehand technique up, or, so it's just, if young athletes can kind of take that mindset of mastery, it's just every day I'm engaging with my sport. It's just, I'm just trying to find a way that in something that I can get better at, then that kind of relays to you, okay, I've got my scholarship, but that's kind of just part of my journey, because I'm just in this journey of mastery where I'm just trying to get better. And I think that's I would say in my kind of dealing, working with Ash when she was young, really similar in terms of always just trying to go out and improve what she was doing at that time, and has had that same kind of, I'm sure that mindset has continued. So I think that, that's one thing I'd say is super important for the athletes, but I think, I'm such a big believer that parents can have such a positive or negative impact on their kids. So I think if the parents are also listening, that they would try and really encourage that mindset in their kids of mindset, and they don't need to push them to do that. They can simply be asking, hey, what have you been working on? What did you get better today? What did you focus on? It's just that continually engaging them in that kind of mastery kind of mindset and experience as they go on their own personal journey.
Yeah, that's
So
a really good point. And I just to your point you made before as well, very related, is that when you get to the US, take charge of your own learning, but take charge of your own body. Don't go to America and say, I'm in America now, they've got amazing facilities, they've got all this amazing stuff, I'm getting all this free stuff. Don't rely on them to make you a better athlete. Don't rely on them to make you healthier. Don't rely on them to stretch you. Don't rely on them to do your personal exercises. There's always the athletes that do well are always got their own little program on the side that they need to do as a regular routine. So that was to your point before.
and even on in the same thing with your own game too, right? Like
Yeah.
take control of your own game, whether it's golf or soccer or whatever. In terms of the coaches were there to help you, but you've got to be on your own journey and get input from the coach. But take that and really be on your own journey in terms of your own expertise development, as well as just obviously looking after your body. But I think that relays even further to your own game, because a coach in that situation has got how many athletes to look after. You need to be basically your own coach, getting bits of inputs from the other coaches and trying to drive your own self-improvement in your own game. And I think that's, if you go across there thinking that they're going to improve you and you're not taking that ownership and just collecting the information you need from the people you need, but really you've got to take ownership of your own development of your game. And once again, that connects into that own personal journey of mastery in your own sport. You got to take that mindset with you as well. Yeah.
Spot on, Sean. I think that's probably a good poignant point to finish on. I think, and I'm mindful of your time, but a couple of little takeaways before we sign off is, I think, importantly, like we're working with student athletes all around the world, not just here in Australia, who are on this journey to America and in America as we speak. You can access Sean these days. Modern technology is fantastic. You can do online consults and things like that. So that's something to keep in mind in this COVID world as well. I think that's important to know that you don't have to be physically in the clinic with Sean. It's obviously ideal if you can be, but that's something you can pursue as well. And the other thing, just moving forward, obviously, Study and Play USA work very closely with Sean and his staff, and have done for a number of years. And so there's some certain things we'll be doing in 2022 for you to look forward to. We'll be doing some video resources, Sean, is that right? And other shared experiences that all designed to make you all better student athletes. So keep an eye out for that. We look forward to sharing those updates. But Sean, really appreciate your words of wisdom. Some nice.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris.
Nice pockets of gold today, and we'll be in touch. Look forward to seeing more of you across the year.
Yep, perfect, great.